Evening. I'm Father Alexander. This is St. Peter's in Hove. Welcome to the Book of Daniel and our 295th step in our walking tour through the Bible. Now, the Book of Daniel is a bit of a relief, frankly, after the Book of Ezekiel. The Ezekiel is rather impenetrable at times. Daniel is clear and it's meant to be understood. It's user friendly. Now, the book of Daniel needs to be placed in its context. Its context is very easy. It was written during the persecution of the Jews under the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, roughly 160 BC. The story deals with Daniel, who is a boy at the court of the Babylonian king during the Babylonian captivity. However, the person who's written this book has effectively written what literary critics, biblical critics, call a novel. It's not actually a novel, it's what I would describe as a storybook. It's a book about olden times, which is meant to inspire you to keep the faith here and now. It's a book written for the Jews suffering under Antiochus Epiphanes, as described in the book of the Maccabees, trying to put fresh heart into them, drawing upon the heroic past of the Jewish people living under the yoke of the Babylonians. So that's the mise en scène. That is setting the scene. So was Daniel a real person? Well, yes, I'm sure he was. But the truth of the matter is the way the book is written shows that the author plays fast and loose with historical detail. Now, that's exactly like the Book of Esther. The Book of Esther is not a history book. The Book of Esther is, I suppose, at best described as a historical novel, or rather, it's a historical storybook. It's about the here and now, but drawing on this remote past. Here in Daniel, we're talking about the remote past. Now, let's just look at the first chapter. In the first chapter, Daniel and his three companions are taken on as pages in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar appoints them to be educated so that they may entertain him later on with their conversation. And he also gives orders for them to eat at the king's table. Now, that is to say, this was quite a common arrangement, I suppose. The idea was eating at the king's table. We got this, if you remember, with Jezebel. She had all those prophets of Baal eating at her table. It means basically being a pensioner of the king. In other words, your board and lodging will be provided by the king. Now, of course, Daniel can't eat at the king's table, neither can his three companions, because they are such pious Jews, they do not dare risk the contamination of eating non-kosher food. The word kosher is not mentioned here, of course. The word kosher postdates the biblical narrative by many, many hundreds of years. So they want to keep the law of the Lord with regard to diet. So they say to the chief eunuch, please don't force us to eat the king's food. Rather, let us just eat vegetables, because they're always kosher. And if after a few days we look a bit thin in the face and so on, then we'll think again. But honestly, you won't get into trouble with the king, because presumably the chief eunuch would then sell their food on to somebody else. You won't get in trouble with the king. We'll look just as bright and happy with vegetables as we would with the stuff you provide. And so go to chapter 1, verse 18. When the time stipulated by the king for the boys to be presented to him came round, the chief eunuch, go back a bit. The man agreed to do what they asked. This is verse 14. And put them on 10 days' trial. When the 10 days were over, they looked better and fatter than any of the boys who had eaten their allowance from the royal table. So the guards withdrew their allowance of food and wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. To these four boys, God gave knowledge and skill in every aspect of literature and learning. Daniel also had the gift of interpreting every kind of vision and dream. When the time stipulated by the king for the boys to be presented to him came round, the chief eunuch presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king conversed with them, and among all the boys found none to equal Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they became members of the king's court. And on whatever point of wisdom or understanding he might question them, he found that them 10 times better than all the magicians and the soothsayers is in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Okay, so what is this telling us? It's saying, very simply, keep to a kosher diet. It's also saying, do not, under any circumstances, fall in with the Hellenizers who are trying to persuade you to eat Hellenistic food, pork and things like that, non-kosher meat and so on, or shellfish and things like that. Do not, under any circumstances, assimilate yourself to the peoples around you, the Hellenists, or in this case, the Babylonians. Stay ye separate. That is the whole point of this. And of course, when this was written at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus had this idea of assimilating the unassimilated. And the best way to do that, of course, is say, come and eat our delicious food. You'll find it so much nicer than that kosher stuff that you've been noshing on up to now. But this is saying, no, stay kosher. Kosher is good. Look at Daniel. And it turned out he was the brightest boy in the whole court, even though, or not even though he was kosher, but simply because he was kosher. So it's a exhortation to remain ritually pure. Now, the next story, and so that's a little self-contained story. So it's almost like a Ladybird book of kosher. In other words, this is the sort of book. Do you remember Daniel? Blah, blah, blah. The next story, which is in chapter 2, is the king has this amazing vision of this composite statue. And he asks his soothsayers and he asks Daniel what the meaning of the vision is. But it's much worse than that. He doesn't just ask the soothsayers what the meaning of the vision is. He asks them, I've had a dream. Tell me what I dreamt. You're supposed to be soothsayers, after all. You know everything. Tell me what I dreamt. And he says, verse 2, he says, oh gosh. Tell your servants the dream, and we shall reveal its meaning to you. That's verse 5. If you cannot tell me what I dreamt and what it means, I shall have you torn limb from limb, and your houses turned into dunghills. Not nice. If, on the other hand, you can tell me what I dreamt and what it meant. So the soothsayers are really put in a bind because they have no idea what the king has dreamt, because the soothsayers are charlatans, aren't they? But Daniel is able to tell the king what he dreamt. Now, of course, the dream of this composite statue, the golden head and then the bronze and the earthenware feet and so on, what is it? Well, here Daniel says at the end of the chapter what it's all about. He says, you, your majesty, you are the golden head. That's verse 38. You are the golden head, and after you another kingdom will rise, not as great as yours, and then a third of bronze, which will rule the whole world. There will be a fourth kingdom, hard as iron that pulverizes and crushes all. Like iron that breaks everything to pieces, it will crush and break all the earlier kingdoms. The feet you saw, part earthenware, part iron, are a kingdom which will be split in two, which will retain something of the strength of iron, just as you saw the iron and the clay and the earthenware mixed together, and so on. But what it's saying is, of course, that then it says a stone breaks away and the whole thing is shattered. Now, the point of this dream is not a dream for Nebuchadnezzar to have any comfort from. It's a dream, rather, for the reader to have comfort from. You've been oppressed. First, the Babylonians came and oppressed you. Then, the Persians came and oppressed you. Then, the Greeks came and oppressed you. Alexander the Great came and oppressed you. Then, the Seleucids came and oppressed you. And then, one day, all these people are going to be blown away by the wind. In other words, kingdoms come, kingdoms go, but the word of God remains forever. And of course, the king fell prostrate before Daniel. Daniel is such a winner, isn't he? And the king thanks Daniel profoundly for his wisdom, even though what Daniel has predicted is the ultimate demise, not just of this particular king, but of the royal system altogether. So the oppressors one day will all disappear. This is a nice thought, isn't it? First of all, keep to your faith and your practices. And remember, the people who are oppressing you now, one day they'll be completely gone. So it's inviting the reader to have faith in the future. It's also inviting us to have faith in the future, I feel. We shouldn't despair about present circumstances, however hard they may be. And for many Catholics, circumstances are very hard, particularly those, I imagine, living in North Korea, if there are any, those living in China, those living in Vietnam. Life is tough. But one day, this toughness will all just be a bad dream. Those who oppress you will not last forever. So that's the first two chapters of the book of Daniel. Please read them, they're delightful. Bye.